Hi, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Welcome to IntiHub's 10X webinar. So my name is Nofel Cahyadi. I'm the CEO and founder of IntiHub, and I will be your webinar host tonight. So IntiHub is an innovation and exponential transformation consulting firm. What we do basically to help to partner with our clients and help them to navigate through innovation towards their business growth. So if you want to know more about our services and programs, please visit our website. Now, let me start by giving you a list of things. You can see my screen, right? So you can see, I don't know, like more than 10 items in front of your screen. So these things, newspapers, public libraries, classroom, and so on and so forth, they do have something in common. So have a think for a few seconds. Maybe you can actually share your thoughts. What are things that they have in common? So basically, the fact is the things on the list that you see on the list are the things that have been disrupted or are being disrupted by the ones on the right. So as you can see, newspaper has been disrupted by online news. I think a few and less and less people are subscribing to the paper newspapers, right? And public libraries have been disrupted by Wikipedia. Music stores by audio streaming, Spotify and so on. Physical stores by e-commerce. So disruption is not new as we know it. If we go back 100 years ago, Ford made the automobile available to many people, which revolutionized transportation. And they also disrupted a number of the industries back then, including wagon and carriage businesses. So disruption or being disrupted is one of the constant concerns of business leaders. Business leaders always worried about what the competitors or newcomers or even startups are capable of doing in terms of disrupting their business models or disrupting their industry, right? And the fear of making the wrong choices eventually leads the leaders and companies to become paralyzed on their strategic move. Um, so one example is Polaroid. Everyone knows what Polaroid is, yeah. It was a pioneer in digital imaging in 1960s. However, as we know it, the company failed to make the necessary investments to hold the lead in the 1990s when digital photography overtook film. And of course, there are so many examples how companies and industries are being disrupted, right? And one of my favorite stories is the story of Netflix versus Blockbuster. Blockbuster. But we're not going to talk about Netflix and Blockbusters now. So what does all this mean to us? This means no industries or companies or even professions are immune from the effects of disruptive change. So here, what do you see on the screen? It's a swan, black swan, right? So black swans, in quotes, are the unforeseeable exponential disruptions in economy, society, and environment, like what we are experiencing today with COVID-19 pandemic. These are a new reality that only a few of us are prepared for. And in the years to come, we will witness some radical changes around us. Many of today's businesses, organizations, or even governing bodies like government will no longer exist in the same way as they are today. So in this webinar, we will discuss what organizations can do in order to stay relevant and to future-proof themselves. So the question that I'm going to ask you, are you ready to disrupt or be disrupted? Now, it's my pleasure today to introduce to you our storyteller. I like the word storyteller instead of speaker. I think it sounds better, right? So the speaker is going to tell a story. He's a very good friend of mine. He's based in Berlin, Dr. Arndt Pechstein. I have to be careful when pronouncing his name, his last name. I hope I pronounce it correctly. He's the founder of Phi 360 Consultancy, chairman of Biomimicry Academy. He's an agile coach as well as change consultant. He holds a PhD in neuroscience. He is the initiator of hybrid thinking approach, which he's going to talk about during this webinar. And he's also a fantastic and inspiring keynote and TEDx speaker. He's a multi-award winning entrepreneur. His transformative work has been applied across all sectors. And this is my favorite part, his credo. Don't just be successful, be significant. Very well said. Arndt, welcome, and thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Novel. Great pleasure to be here. So welcome from my side as well. I'm Arndt, and I'm happy to speak about hybrid thinking and how we can build resilience and how we can transform faster in times of great uncertainty and times of disruption. So let me start with a quote here, which I like from Sir Peter Blake, which is, "New technology is common, but new thinking is rare." Very often when we talk about transformation, we mention digital transformation, and we think introducing new technologies will solve all problems. Well, that's not the case. Of course, they help us, they enable us, they empower us to do things, but the new thinking which comes with it and the new abilities, but also behavioral changes need to be considered. And that is something that is way beyond the technology per se. It has to do with mindset, with culture, and with basically how we build our systems in which technology is embedded. And in order to get your head around hybrid thinking, I just want to share my background a little bit and how I came about developing this approach and that I now use in organizations. As Novella already introduced me, I started in the biosciences, actually. I studied biochemistry, biotechnology, and eventually did my PhD in neuroscience on learning and memory. And while working on probably one of the most complex systems we know, our brain, is exciting, I was not really fascinated by the way academia works because it is very rigid. It is very much into competition, into topics that give you and earn you an impact factor in a high-ranking journal. But I was not into impact factors. I wanted impact. So I thought, how can I basically communicate and apply things that I was so passionate about with reaching people and creating future and not just publishing it in journals? So I looked into the combination of academic research, scientific knowledge, and innovation. And I found biomimicry, which is looking into complex adaptive systems, into biology and natural systems, and how they cope with uncertainty, with complexity, and how they adapt to change. And that then led me to user-centered innovation, to design thinking, to agile approaches, which I then combine, of course, also with technology. So looking into what are the success patterns of these organizations that Salim Ismail calls exponential organizations, organizations that merely exist for 20, maybe 25 years and grow at an exponential rate because they grow with the exponentiality of technologies. So this is very interesting, and that brings together all we need. It brings together humans, it brings together biological systems and planetary boundaries within which we have to operate. It brings together emerging technologies with actually a deep understanding of how systems work. Now, let me explore this a little bit deeper. Why do we do this and have to do this now? And that question of urgency is really very evident if you look at this graph. And this is something Novell has already basically outlined. What happens in today's world is what we see on this blue graph. It's an exponential pace of change and development enabled through exponential technologies. And the way we think, though, the way we are hardwired as human beings is linear. We're linearly thinking, which is depicted by this white line, which means that based on what we experience, based on our past, we anticipate the future. And the gap between what we think will happen and what actually happens grows wider and wider. And that is on the one hand really exciting. On the other hand, this is really disruptive and can create frustration, fear, and chaos. Now, how do we move from chaos and fear to amazement and opportunity? And that is something that I want to capture here in this keynote. So to get a little bit deeper into the dynamics of exponential organizations and exponential development, you have to understand one thing. And this is what Peter Diamandis calls the 6Ds of exponential technologies. You first digitize a process. So something from the analog world in the digital world. Usually, you are then witnessing a disruptive phase. So it looks like as if this will never make it. It's way too expensive. It's just a nerdy thing. Nobody really cares about that. Think about the first 3D printers. Think about the first drones. People thought that's just expensive toys. But now they are used on high professional filming, for exploration, for military, for everything really. And they became disruptive for blood delivery in the global south. Really disruptive business models that are built with such things. As soon as this happens, you dematerialize these things. So we have talked about some of these examples before. There is barely anyone who buys DVDs or CDs today. You listen to Spotify, you watch Netflix, it's dematerialized. There is no physical object anymore that you need. You stream the content. As soon as this happens, you demonetize. Business models move from scarcity to abundance. So it's a totally different business model logic behind. And as soon as this happens, because the prices move towards marginal cost zero, you democratize access. And this has happened in pretty much any sector. You can look at commerce, you can look at music, at video, at hotel business or traveling. You can look at pictures. We have seen, just as Novell said, the same year in 2012, when Kodak filed for bankruptcy, Instagram was bought for $1 billion by Facebook. And it only had less than 20 employees, I believe. Tesla, same thing. Here you may think it's not dematerialized. Well, think about what Elon Musk just said. As soon as they have reached level 5 autonomy, they will not sell a single car. They will make it abundant. They will make it cloud-based because the profit and the business model is much better not owning a car and not selling a car, but basically running a business model on sharing and access rather than selling the car. So this is happening and disrupting sector by sector. Now, and this is what we call the VUCA world. VUCA being an acronym for the 4 words: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Volatility meaning the speed, the scope, and the amplitude of change increase radically. Uncertainty comes then from the fact that events are less predictable. Novell already mentioned black swans. So these are unpredictable events. This term was coined by Nassim Taleb. And these are events that have a huge impact, like this crisis we are witnessing right now. And they are totally unpredicted. And only retrospectively, you can see where that came from. And the causal dependencies are hidden and not known. This creates increasing complexity because the number of possibilities and interdependencies increases. And finally, there's a huge ambiguity because the boundaries are blurring. And that's what we're talking about, hybrid thinking also, because these boundaries are blurring more and more. And information can be interpreted in various ways. Depending on what kind of information I have or have access to, I come to different conclusions. Now, this very often is a synonym for fear and basically a threat. But you can turn it into an opportunity. And that is something I want to talk about with hybrid thinking. The problem is that we, and most of us, don't see it as an opportunity, but as a threat, is because we were conditioned throughout centuries in something I call conveyor belt mentality. If you look at our schools at large, even today, we are running military style and very strictly organized education regimes where we expect everyone to perform the same way, learn the same thing. We grade them in a competitive way and basically train for mediocrity. We do not train for excellence. Nobody will discover their passion in this kind of work regime. This was good 200 years ago when we wanted to get as many people into education. In times where we want to empower people to find and live their true passion in order to add maximum value to society, this education system doesn't work. Likewise, organizations of the past are siloed, they are structured, they are controlled, command and control structures. So this is how we were brought up, and I always refer to it not as education, but as conditioning. And we need to uncondition ourselves, and we need to relearn new patterns in order to harvest the opportunities that lie in today's time. For that, we have to let go of certain things that have always been that way. Because just because it has been that way in the past doesn't mean it's future-proof. Values and certain principles can be transported in the future and should be. But just because we have done it in the past is not a reason to continue doing it even one day longer. We always have to evaluate what is reasonable and appropriate to do and what is not and needs to be replaced. Now, how do we transition to this new zeitgeist if there is this need for new mindsets, a need for new processes, a need for new organizational structures? And that is something I call hybrid thinking. Hybrid thinking really leverages this VUCA world into an opportunity. And how I do this, I will lead you through these single letters, and I've replaced these things with the same acronyms, but like with different, like basically words. And the first one, instead of volatility, or how to counteract and leverage volatility, is a vision. What we need if everything changes constantly around us, as an organization, as a community, even as a society, is a big vision, a transformative purpose, the reason why we exist. Because if we have this, this is something that brings people together, both on a cognitive and emotional level, to strive for the same thing. It gives a strategic direction and basically leads towards an impact that fulfills people. That is a purpose that people are connected to and that they design their tasks and their objectives towards. Now, this term, transformative purpose, or the moonshot thinking, actually comes from 51 years ago when we did the moon landing. This was a huge effort, and Kennedy back then said, we will put our foot on the moon in this decade. And the head of NASA, he was really saying, well, we talked about it, but by no means are we able to do this. And Kennedy said, I say that not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And this vision was basically enabling teams to develop technologies that were unimaginable just a few years ago. And the rest is history. We know they made it. And this is something that we need in order to have people strive for something that they are really passionate about and that they're aligned to. And this transformative purpose is something that we see in recent and very successful organizations. Elon Musk, the starter of Tesla and Hyperloop and Solar City and all these things, SpaceX, he notoriously is good at putting out a big vision. People very often refer to him as being crazy. And yes, he might be, but he puts this big vision. And the vision is not we build extreme cars, but his vision for Tesla, for instance, is accelerating the world's transition to renewable energy. So that is way bigger than just making profit with cars and building fancy cars. It is something to have an impact, to leave a legacy, to really move something. And then, by the way, we happen to build cars in order to get there. This is a totally different narrative. And that gets him the best talents in the world that want to work with him. And likewise, there are many of these exponential organizations that do this. So it's not just being efficient or being the best by the standards of your industry, but really, why are you existing? And this fundamental purpose is essential. And this is so much more essential in a VUCA world where everything else changes, because having a positive vision as a counterpart to all the dystopias and negative news we see is something that brings people together and aligns them on a direction. This transformative purpose also requires values. It requires, for instance, an understanding, and we see this now especially, that we have to operate within the planetary boundaries, so that we cannot continue with the old normal, that we need a new normal, that we need not only user-centered design, but life-centric design, to look into what is beyond humans, what is the impact that we have on ecosystems, on the larger system. And here we can learn from nature. This is a process that we call biomimicry, and this is something that helps us to bridge this chaos and bring it into an opportunity realm. Because here we look at success strategies from 3.8 billion years of evolution and how we can leverage those in a world that is not mechanic anymore, but this is organic. So biomimicry, the term that originally comes from the Greek words bios for life and mimesis for imitation, means to really understand the fundamental patterns of how biological systems work, abstract them to human problem solving, and create systems that are, for instance, resilient. And if you look at the language we use in business, it is all biology nowadays. We talk about the living organization, we talk about resilience, we talk about ecosystems, we talk about self-organization, about networks, about adaptation. All these terms are biological origin. So we can learn big time from biological models. And if we really understand how they work and why they are so successful, we can really advance our organization and operate within the boundary conditions of our planet and create value for people and planet alike. Now, we've done this, for instance, working with Audi, and we worked with many others, but here, this was integrating this kind of thinking using user-centered design, but also biomimicry, looking into biological systems, how we can reinvent and redesign urban mobility in the 21st century in the city center. Because it's not about just redesigning the car. It's really about creating a vision where you leverage biological principles, multifunctionality, for instance. Why should this vehicle only be used for people, not for cargo? Can't it be an adaptable interior design? Why does it have to stand around 95% of its lifetime, like a car today, and only move 5% of its time? This is mental. Why can't we design smaller modules and in a modular fashion bring them together, enabling entire new business models and approaches of transportation? Why does it have to be owned? Why can't it be shared and cloud-based, that I use a much more efficient and a much more effective system in a city and use city space in a much more meaningful way than this? This is a picture of Berlin. So our approach here, and we have built an entire case around it, how can we leverage emerging technologies and bring users and user needs back into the picture and reclaim urban space for people and life quality and not for parking infrastructures and technology? So these are visions that we need in order to drive technology, in order to drive the future of societies and of business. Now, the second part is then the uncertainty. And if everything seems to be uncertain and not really tangible, then what you want to do is you want to empower people to feel confident with what they can do. So you want to empower them, you want to build on their potential, and you want to upskill them. So if you have empowered and driven individuals, you're able to fulfill your vision and to have an impact in society and with your business. So for people to really live their full potential, it is not only about basically leveraging the things that we could measure in the past, for instance, through an intelligence quotient, where we quantified and tried to quantify intelligence and everything that can be analyzed and rational, but also leveraging your intuition, using heuristics for decision making. And also looking at risk differently, because risk assessment, which is done by our system 2, which is the cortical areas, requires that you basically know the probabilities and you're operating in a known field. For uncertainty, you cannot do this. You deal with ambiguity. And this is one thing I will refer to last, also regarding business modeling, because here you're not knowing the probability and you're dealing and handling unknown environments. So this is a totally different thing. You cannot assess and measure risk, but you have to deal with ambiguity, and you need different skills for that. So what we need to empower and upskill individuals is to appreciate that we need both analytic and rational skills on the one hand, but also creative and intuitive skills. And our brains are made to do this. We just have to acknowledge and empower people to use both parts of the brain in order to be fully empowered and high potential individuals, both in organizations and in society. And if you match this with the values from before, then you have really capable individuals of driving the future. Now, the next thing then is, how do you deal with complexity? And complexity can only be dealt with, and this comes from systems science, if you build an equally complex solution system. And this works through collaboration. So regardless how empowered an individual is, and even if you have the greatest group of experts, they cannot solve a problem. So you bring together people from different backgrounds and high diversity, and you let them collaborate. And for this, you need to create conditions that allow collaboration. And collaboration is first and foremost built on trust. I only collaborate with people and share information with if I trust those people. So this is about a mindset and a cultural change in organizations, also in society, that is built on trust and not on control and not on mistrust, because this will eventually lead to breaking off in different directions. And that is what we see right now with all this separatist movements and this polarization into different bubbles. And that is not collaborative. This is not creating a joint future. This is everybody living in their own little world. Now, what we need for this is connect and co-create. And here technologies can help us. They can make us get together and share the same values and build stuff together and collaboratively. This again requires a mindset shift from what I call, and Peter Spiegel actually developed this kind of wordplay, from a world of IQ, of the intelligence quotient, to a world where we call the WeQ, the collective intelligence. This is what we need to harness, because this is so much richer and so much more capable of dealing with the complex challenges of the 21st century. No expert group, no single individual, regardless how smart and bright, can solve these problems alone. So this is what we need in the 21st century, moving from the IQ and EQ world of an individual to the collective intelligence, the cloud intelligence, empowered and enabled through emerging and exponential technologies. And if you build organizations that can do this, you build a learning organization that, like sensors, realizes quickly what's happening, relays that information, and reacts quickly, or even preempts certain developments, and therefore becomes the disruptor instead of being disrupted. For that, you need to be very aware of the context. So you need to know that, for instance, Agile, and again, I see many people running around proclaiming that Agile is the solution of everything, which is, again, as wrong as saying we don't need Agile. It's contextual, it's highly situationally specific, and there are many situations, an increasing number of situations and contexts, where you need Agile approaches, where you need experimental approaches, but in a very predictable environment, it doesn't make any sense to use Agile. There you can very well use a very structured scheme. For instance, if you're on board of an airplane, you don't want your pilot to be Agile and try new things. You want him to run by a checklist to make sure this airplane starts as it's supposed to be, because this is a best practice and has been evolved over years, and it's basically fail-proof. And here you don't want any Agile experimental approach. Whereas if you run and change your organization, you definitely want experiments, because if you run by a checklist as just copying another organization, you will definitely fail very big. Now, this requires to constantly reinvent yourself, because the future is not stopping tomorrow. It will continue, and it will continue regardless if you want it or not. So constantly challenging what you do, constantly trying to disrupt yourself, what you're doing, is fundamental to being future-proof and resilient. Because if you don't do it, anybody else out there will do it. And it might not even come from within your industry. It can come from anywhere. If you look at organizations, I come to this in a second, like Google, you cannot even name what this organization is. Is it a IT company? Is it a car company? Is it a financial provider? They are basically everything, and they're entering any kind of segment one after the other and disrupting it. And so do many other big companies or small startups. So you have to constantly reinvent yourself, and that only works through experiments, through observation, and through communication schemes that are collaborative and that relay this information quickly in the organization and make it actionable. Now, the last thing regarding ambiguity is then you want to have agility in your business model. So you want to create business that is future-proof. And there you need to acknowledge that we are moving from an age of scarcity to an age of abundance. This is this exponential thinking. In the past, you could build business models around scarcity, and you were trying to protect these scarce things, which were your basically advantage as opposed of others. So you were basically filing patents in order to secure you only have access to a certain knowledge or technology. Well, again, Elon Musk just made all his inventions open source in order to increase the development, for instance, for electric driving. So this is something that accelerates that technology and is an advantage for himself, but also gives access to others. So you build an entire ecosystem and infrastructure. So this builds an abundance market. So you don't only think about your organization, but you think about the entire ecosystem. And that happens over and over again. If you look at Airbnb, it's not a scarcity market. It's not, I have X amount of hotel rooms, and if there is a trade fair, I can take 3 times the cost of a room. That's what hotels do. And it's an unfair disadvantage for the customer. Now, Airbnb just leverages the abundance of free rooms available and basically sells them for the same price, and it's a self-organized system offering a platform system model. So this is really entirely different. And the old structures that we have built in the 20th century that are not built on the abundance mindset, on a purpose-driven mindset, they do not work in an abundance world. So everything or many things that made you successful in the 20th century will make you fail in the 21st century. So you really need to reinvent yourself. You need to think, what is it that we can leverage in order to tap into the abundance and disrupt our business model? Again, Kodak was a scarcity model. You had a limited number of films or photos per film, and you needed to think about, how can I make the best out of these 21 or 31 pictures? Now, today in the digital world, you can take endless pictures. It's an abundant world. You have a entirely new problem. You want to find the right picture out of these 5,000 pictures that you have taken last holiday. So this is an entire new business model that goes around it. And this goes with what Rita McGrath calls business arenas. We're not talking about business sectors any longer, but we're talking about arenas. Google is not operating in the IT business only. It's not operating in the car business only with Waymo. It's not only operating with Google Pay in the financial world. It does all this and integrates this and builds platforms and ecosystems. And this is so much more powerful because you have so many more touch points, and eventually you funnel your customers into the business. And with that, if done correctly, and if you have the values and purpose in the beginning that they outlined, then you can have an amazing impact on society and the planet at large. Now, this requires, and I cannot stress this more, to really reinvent the things you do. And that's why it's not about efficiency, but it's first and foremost about effectiveness. Really thinking about what do I do before I do that in a more efficient way. Because just making old processes more efficient will not future-proof me at all. And that leads me to the realm of purpose-driven organizations that I call hybrid organizations. These are organizations that I foresee to be the only organizations on the long run to be successful. These are organizations that basically successfully tap into three domains. The first is they create value for people, both for people within their organization, so that they create working conditions that are really something that are attractive and fulfilling, but also create value for the customers and for society as large. The second thing is they make responsible use of exponential technologies. These are organizations that really leverage the potential of technologies. And finally, these are organizations that do not only do anthropocentric design and innovation, but they also work like living systems and are integrated into the planetary boundaries. So they are living systems themselves. They are highly adaptable. They are highly sustainable, and they are highly resilient. And that is something that together creates a future-proof organization. Now, if we talk about resilience, or even better, and I like this term that, again, Nassim Taleb, also the creator of the Black Swan kind of concept, calls anti-fragility, because it's really not about stability or resilience as we know it from like the basically more tech or engineering realm, but really it's the opposite of fragility, anti-fragility. And it has one component of robustness. Yes, you want to withstand certain pressure. You need to have some robustness. But a system is not resilient if it's just robust. It will break. We have built our systems to be very robust and stiff. In the past, they were efficient, but as soon as the conditions change, these efficient systems break down. So what you also want, and that is part of the anti-fragility, is adaptation. Adaptation meaning with the inbuilt mechanisms that you already have, you self-regulate so that you can bounce within a certain scope of your system. Again, that is not enough. You need to go beyond that because you need to integrate the new. And that is something we call transformation. So just self-regulating with existing mechanisms and patterns doesn't suffice. We also need to learn and change. So you need to transform and constantly build in new information, new mechanisms, new patterns in order to redesign your organization and the way you operate or your business operates. And finally, because that again is not enough, and you need to really bring this kind of experimental approach to perfection. And that's something, again, which comes from biology, which is called acceptation or basically pre-adaptation. This is something you constantly want to run experiments that may not even create value right now, but it may provide you an advantage in the future if a black swan hits. So this requires an understanding that it's not only efficiency, but you need to have some redundancy and some things in parallel that are not highly efficient, but they may prove very effective if a crisis hits. So this concept of anti-fragility, which is basically adaptive resilience, and that is what biological systems are, they are adaptively resilient. They can cope with change. They are living, they are breathing, they are absorbing disruption and integrating this in order to create something new, and they get better and more performant upon stress and a crisis. And that is something that we call anti-fragility. And the picture I've chosen in the background is just New York after the Hurricane Sandy, when they decided not to rebuild the gray infrastructure as it was before and just to strengthen it even more to make it more robust, but to use green infrastructure, to use nature and absorbing structures that can deal with high water levels or like these kind of impacts that we've witnessed then. So that was the concept of hybrid thinking, leveraging VUCA as an opportunity by having a transformative purpose, a vision, dealing with mindset innovation, upskilling and empowering people, having agile collaboration to handle complexity and be fast and create future business that is responsible and circular and incorporates responsibly exponential technologies. I'm writing a book about this right now, first in German, it will appear end of this year, later next year, then hopefully in English as well. I would like to end with a quote, "The sky is no longer the limit, our mind is." So let's think exponentially and let's think hybrid. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Arndt. It was a very interesting and insightful talk. So let me open the floor for questions. If you want to type your questions on the chat, or maybe you can unmute yourself if you feel comfortable, please do so. Any questions from anyone? David, please.
Yeah, I'll do it verbally rather than trying to type, because
Yes,
my typing is always so bad.
You're growing big.
Talking to a lot of companies at the moment, we're looking at resilience, and many companies are talking about survivability at the moment. Almost as a condition that they don't know if they're going to be in existence in the next 3 months, let alone 6 months. How can your approach, in a sense, to planning for the future help organizations at this point in time where there is so much uncertainty of the now, let alone the uncertainty of the future?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the risk is that many of these companies will do is they go into survival mode and they rather go for efficiency, cost savings, and all these things. This is the worst thing. It sounds like an intuitive thing to do. Like you close up and you're in like this fight or flight syndrome, but it won't help you to survive. Because with this kind of fear-based narrow thinking, you're rather limited in creativity and anything. What they should do, even though it's risky, of course it is risky, but you should look, what are our assets? What are our capabilities? What is it that we can do and what is needed? So try to do a match. What is really needed? Where can we have an impact? Where is an opportunity? And how can we match this with what we are capable of, leveraging things quickly? And then using, for instance, exponential technologies and also the methodology that is behind this exponential transformation, exponential technologies, looking how I can enter abundance markets and how I can do this with the assets I have or I can get access to because I don't need to own them, is a way to really come up with new business opportunities that may be entirely different or even cannibalizing what I've been doing before. So now is the time to do this. Trying to save a business model that was maybe already obsolete before will not work. And it will just lead to frustration and it will lead to very likely also failure, or you delay the failure by another year and then you will be off the market. So really, it requires bold leadership. It requires sacrifices. It requires creative thinking. It requires risk taking. But that's exactly what you need. And looking for opportunities. The crisis have opened up new opportunities. Trying to spot them, doing due diligence on these kind of things, and trying to match them with things you can do and want to do. Maybe partnering even with others. Maybe even partnering.
Yeah, collaborations.
Yeah.
Well, these days we are seeing a lot more collaborations than ever, right? So people are quickly collaborating with other organizations and stuff. So thank you, David, for the question. There's a side note from Hind. Hi, Hind. Hind was saying that unfortunately, technology often creates more silos than collaboration, right? I think it's just a comment there. Would you like to comment on that, Arndt?
Well, it goes back to the quote that I brought in the very beginning. It's not like a new technology is common, new thinking is rare. By Sir Peter Blake. Yeah. It's really that. Like, of course, if I introduce just a new technology into an old environment and in an old mindset and culture, yes, it creates silos. And nobody will use it maybe even, or they use it in the wrong way. What I need is a total change of values and behaviors. And this is something that needs to go along with technology, and then it can bring people together. And we've seen this in history, both in organizations, but also outside, organizing things, reorganizing democracy. I mean, it's amazing how technology can do this. Here in Germany, I can give you just a short case. There's one guy, it's the CEO of, they are called Unicorn Condoms. He produces condoms that are fully sustainable and vegan. He's really big in the sustainable realm. And he organized a crowd sharing event, or a crowd sharing campaign to get almost €2 million for people to participate, to rent basically the Olympia Stadium in Berlin, which is huge usually for sports events, to get as many people, like 60,000 people in, to redesign democracy in order to send petitions on a minute basis, because there's a limit of how many people you need in order to make a petition binding to politicians to discuss about it and discuss whether or not they take it. If you have 60,000 people in the stadium, you can do this. You can have one petition per minute. So this is a really new thing. And he leveraged technology by crowdfunding campaign, by using social media to get this out, by having them communicate. And if it would have happened now in June. So it was canceled because of COVID-19, really tragic. But this is something where technology creates commonalities and leverages future of collectives, and it doesn't separate. So it needs to be done in a wise way. Of course, it can also create silos, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you, Arndt. There's one question from Darlington Akbar. How can startups leverage purpose and the draw of ecosystem thinking to drive innovation?
Yeah, I believe especially startups are in a position to do that. And we see so much social entrepreneurship and social enterprises emerging because startups have this unique thing that they don't have legacy constraints. If you have an existing organization, you have legacy constraints. You come from an organization that is built, has a history, and that rather blocks and the immune system of that organization fights anything that tries to innovate it. In a startup, you have usually very aspirational and passionate people. And very often, and depending now where you look at, I mean, if you look at the regular Silicon Valley startups, that's maybe not the case. But in Europe, I can totally attest this, to see this, especially here in Berlin. There's a lot of driven entrepreneurs who do social entrepreneurship, who have a purpose. And they then can do this, and they have to bootstrap, and they have to work with ecosystems because they don't have all assets and resources to do that all by themselves. So especially those usually leverage ecosystem thinking to think, how can we build things in partnership? How can we collaborate? How can we leverage abundance? And how can we disrupt old things that the big ones do not feel comfortable to do differently because, of course, it disrupts them. So this is a big opportunity. And I think especially they are posed in a position that they can do this disruption and this kind of purpose-driven innovation.
So having said that, talking about startups, is this hybrid thinking approach applicable to any size of companies, from startup SMEs to large corporations? Yes. Any limitation on size or sectors?
Yes, it is. And I go even further. It's for any team and for any society even. Because if you look at it, I mean, it's not rocket science, but it's so logical and still not done in most organizations, even teams. If you do not, and if you start again with hybrid thinking with the first part, if you do not have a vision and an objective that you're aligned to, you will never have a performant team. Everybody thinks something else is important because you're never aligned on this deep purpose and the goals and objectives you have. You need then to break them down. You can use objective like OKR method and so on. You need to break it down into tasks. The second thing, if you don't have empowered individuals, if you don't motivate people intrinsically, if you don't help them to grow with their tasks and give them autonomy to do things, you will never have people who perform at best. If you then don't make these people to collaborate, be it a team, be it an organization, small or large, or even a society where you come together to shape future together, you will not have buy-in. You will not get successful things done. And finally, if you don't build organizations around success, leveraging opportunities, you will not last long. So all these things are equally important for small teams, for companies of all sizes, but also even for societies or communities.
Okay, Marlene is asking, should collaboration be more important than competitiveness? What do you think?
Yes, generally yes. The answer is generally yes. Even we take, it's a very interesting question. We take our analogy and our reasoning for competition that we say, well, in nature, everything is about competition. That comes from a misinterpretation of Darwin's work. We all have this quote of survival of the fittest in mind, which he never said or published. It was a reframing of his work. He always said those species survive that are best adapted. And it's not the most intelligent, not the strongest species. Otherwise, we would still have the dinosaurs. But the small mammals survived. So it is those who can adapt. And if you look at biology, and this is what changes even in biology and research, more than 50% of the interactions in the nature, in the natural and biological world are mutualistic, or synergistic, or collaborative. They are not competitive. That doesn't mean that we don't need competition. A healthy competition and like a friendly and game kind of competition is something that spurs creativity and lets us evolve and improve, but not in a way that we did it before, this kind of toxic competition, where we go for competition with all its consequences, basically, and all the destructive and toxic side effects that we had also. So collaboration is key, and it creates through win-win. And game theory, you can look in game theory. If you collaborate, you have a mutualistic, better outcome for everyone and the whole.
Thank you, Arne. Before we continue with one or two more questions, everyone, if I can ask for a favor from you to fill in the feedback survey. So I actually put the link of the feedback survey on the chat. It's only 3 questions, a very quick question, so you can do it within a minute or so. That will be very appreciated. And also, I'm going to share Dr. Arndt's slides here, which you can download. It's not a full slides, but at least you know the key points are there. So I will keep this one for a week or so you can download it now. If you have any questions, so please feel free to unmute yourself or type it on the chat. Now, Hen was asking, will COVID-19 possibly have a negative effect on collaboration?
Well, that's a good question. It's hard to foresee. Generally, I think the answer is no. I think it will rather boost collaboration because it shows the weaknesses of our old systems. It does not exclude that there will be also like an extreme form of competitiveness, for instance, maybe, and we see that already about the vaccine, for instance, where we see a lot of competition, who's first and who makes that business model and this business, basically. At the same time, we see a collaboration in science that we have never seen in human history before. Exchange of information and the speed that allows, that is like basically made possible for this, that is unprecedented. So I rather believe we're at basically the tipping point of increasing collaboration, of going back to values, of moving more towards climate action. That doesn't mean that we will fall back in certain ways to old patterns, but we have all, this is the nice thing, we have all experienced a different way of living. We have a standard and a reference now that we didn't have before. So we know what it feels not to do certain things, and we maybe have realized it's not too bad after all to not be constantly on the road to go to meetings. I can equally do this virtually, or I maybe don't have to use the plane and the car all the time. And we saw the side effects of spending more quality with people we care about. So this will have a lasting impact on us and will give us a reference to design a better future. So maybe in the short term, because here the question comes, maybe we see some also extreme cases of more competition in some fields. Generally, I think, and also on the long term, we will learn and see that collaboration is beneficial, and we'll go more towards that. And this will be fueled by a sharing economy. I mean, things that Jeremy Rifkin has been talking about for 20 years already. This is now happening bigger, on a bigger scale. And it's fueled again and enabled by technologies. And it will lead to entirely new different phenotypes and outcomes, like collaboration, not only in a business sense, but also on a societal level. So I'm 100% sure that within the next 10 years, we will see a redesign of democracy, what it means to vote through technology, through empowerment, a bigger interest in taking responsibility, but also taking part in decision-making and the consequences it has. So I believe there's more collaboration going to happen than ever before.
Okay, very quickly, Arndt, can you please share some of the specific case studies, so where the hybrid thinking approach has been used?
So one I showed already. We have been working with Audi. We work with a lot of organizations, but we've been using it with Deutsche Bahn, for instance, which is the German national train, biggest employer in Germany. And there we built an ecosystem for the future of employee mobility. So moving away from just like you can fly or you can use the train or you have your private business car to something where we collaboratively, and these are the key accounts of Deutsche Bahn, but these are also startups and like small organizations and research entities that come together to redesign how can we make business travel more sustainable, more flexible, and more 21st century. And this is an open innovation ecosystem, and they pilot with each other. So we have people from a big consultancy going to another big consultancy, helping them to pilot it in their organization. So this is really unprecedented. I've never seen that before. A network that grew within 2.5 years from like basically to more than 150 people, more than 100 companies of all sizes to really have impact, and several pilots being implemented already. So this is really, really exciting. Another, like we work with a lot of organizations, pharmaceutical, we have finance organizations where we use this for internal reorganization and transformation with departments or divisions to really empower them to reinvent themselves and make business processes more, like increase workflow, but also fulfillment and increase the quality of the outcomes. So these are a few of these examples.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Arndt. I think it's just time for us to wrap up. But before we go, let me just share some quick announcements. So next week, we'll have the 10X webinar. The topic is Blended Finance for Corporation Transformation around Sustainability by Dr. Vanina Farber. She's the chair of Ilya Center for Social Innovation at IMD Business School. So anyone who's into social innovation or who wants to learn more about impact investment and sustainability, you better not miss this one. So it's really great topic that Vanina is going to talk about. And also we have lined up some great global speakers for our next 10X webinar series. So take a look and stay tuned. So every Wednesday or Thursday, depending on the availability of the speaker, we're going to have quite diverse topics and speakers from different countries to share. Also, I would like to share this one. IntiHub and Purpose Alliance, we are actually partnering to host the Purpose Challenge series. This is a global challenge, and we are hosting the one for Middle East on the 25th of June, in which the participants, and by the way, this is for free, the participants will work in teams to come up with disruptive solutions for the future of work. So if anyone is interested, we will be sharing more info in the next couple of days. And also we have this 10X Sprint, which is the 10-week online immersive and experiential journey to become future-proof innovators, entrepreneurs, or entrepreneurs. We're going to launch the online version in June next month, actually. This is actually an online version of our 10X Academy program, which is the offline version, which we've been running since 2017. So if you're interested in becoming and learning to become a disruptive innovators, this is a program for you, but this is not for free. So before we close it, the webinar, do you have any parting message for everyone here?
Maybe just one thought. Like, future doesn't just happen; it is created, and it's either by you or by the others, and that's your decision.
Okay.
So
exactly.
Active creators of the future and shape it based on values.
Short and nice. So thank you very much, Arndt, for your time and for being with us today.
Gladly. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. As we're coming towards the end of Ramadan, I wish all my Muslim friends an Eid Mubarak, and stay safe and healthy. So see you guys in our next webinars. So bye for now.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.